Hi, and welcome once again to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is January 17th, and today we're going to hear the first part of a two-part article entitled, How Small Can Technology Get?
So, computers used to be big. Now they fit in your pocket, and in fact, they are much, much smaller. I wonder, though, how much smaller we will get used to technology at a tiny size. I wonder, a cell phone is a perfect size. It fits in your pocket. How much smaller can it be without you actually wearing it?
Actually, a cell phone is already too small for me. I hardly ever use it.
You prefer a tablet?
I use a tablet because it's got bigger print and it's got a bigger space to work with. So that is already, I can use it, but it's not as comfortable. I'm always coming to the edge. So a lot of times the smaller things are not stuff that the consumer is using directly. It's stuff inside bigger machines.
Yeah, I suppose that when I'm working, I much prefer to work on my laptop than opposed to a phone. But I don't know. I remember a few years ago, they had the Google glasses. And
they didn't work.
They didn't work. And I felt they were extremely intrusive in many ways, especially you can snap a picture with your eyes. And instantly I was just like, this is a pervert's dream.
That's creepy.
That's exactly right. Yes.
And you can see it so clearly because it's behind your glasses.
Yeah, I am not comfortable with some kind of those technologies. But I suppose in 20 years, who knows where we'll be? Think 20 years ago, cell phones are big and clunky, and they were quite hard to even have.
Yeah.
So I suppose in 20 years, who knows what we'll be working with.
Exactly. Okay, here's our article. Over the decades, computers have permeated our lives to an astonishing degree. When the first modern computer was conceptualized and built in the 20th century, it was so large that it took up a whole room. Over time, the technology shrank. First, computers became small enough to sit on a desk and be brought into the home. Then they were made lightweight and portable, giving us the laptop. Today, most people have something even smaller, a smartphone that can fit into a pocket. Though that's as compact as most people are used to, computers and technology are getting even tinier.
One of the tiniest forms of technology available today is the microbot. A microbot is a very tiny robot, a machine programmable by a computer that is built to perform specific tasks. You might be inclined to refer to this as just a small robot, but the size and dimensions of microbots are actually quite precise. A microbot is less than 1 millimeter in width, approximately the size of the tip of a pencil. In comparison, a small robot, which can be up to 100 centimeters in width, would be absolutely gigantic. If you think that microbots are as small as you can get, think again. Nanobots smaller than 1 micrometer exist, but these are so small that they aren't visible to the naked eye.
Since microbots are so small, they are potentially very cheap. Scientists and engineers working to develop these microbots believe that they could be useful to explore environments or areas that are too small or dangerous for people. And because the computing power of one single microbot isn't that large, microbots could be deployed in large groups or swarms of microbots. At the moment, the biggest obstacle in the development of these tiny machines is figuring out how to power a robot that can only contain a minuscule battery. Now, it sounds like we've stopped in the middle of things, and that's exactly what we've done because we have part 2 to go on to tomorrow. So we're just going to go over the first part today. Back to the beginning. Over the decades, computers have permeated our lives to an astonishing degree. Now, there's something interesting here, and that is, first of all, originally over the decades was put at the end of the sentence. We moved it to the beginning because over the decades is just background, and like in Chinese, it's better to put background first and save the more important things for the end. That's the way Chinese always works. But English actually often works better that way too. So we moved over the decades to the front of the sentence. The second thing that kind of made me do a double take was permeated means that it is everywhere. It's very deeply entrenched in all parts of our lives. That's permeated. And then it says to an astonishing degree. So for me, it sounded a little repetitive or redundant. It's okay, but it also sounded like it was sort of repeating an idea we'd already expressed.
You know what adjective I used for permeated? I just wrote soaked. Like to me, permeated, I think of kind of like a sponge. And I know it's not like a perfect synonym. It's not really that accurate. But when I was thinking about it, I was like, they're kind of almost like if you have water and you have a paper towel, it just soaks up and water goes everywhere. It's just a big mess. And that's kind of how computers are. They're everywhere now. And no matter how you might try to escape them, it's really quite difficult.
Right. And per means through. Miate means to go. So it goes through something. It means it's not stopped by walls. It just is absorbed right through it. So that's why soaked is pretty close in meaning. But like I said, permeated already means everywhere. So per is actually, goes through everywhere. But then we say to an astonishing degree. That makes it even stronger. But it says about the same thing. So the next sentence, when the first modern computer was conceptualized and built in the 20th century, it was so large that it took up a whole room. Now, I have a little story to tell with this one. Way back when I was a real little kid, I was, maybe 8 years old, I'm guessing, 7 or 8 years old. My father said he wanted to show me something really special that was made by a company called the Cartier Corporation in St. Paul. And he says, this is called an electronic brain. He took me to this company. They opened a door, and the whole room was filled with a computer.
That's funny.
He actually showed me and I really give my dad credit for that because he really paid attention to our education, my sister and me. And he took me to see one of those things. It was not at all common in the 60s. It was just starting. And he says, look, that's called an electronic brain. We call it a computer. And it filled the whole room. That's
funny that you mentioned this. This very large computer that we're talking about here did indeed fill up a whole floor. And if you look at pictures in the past, it's like a bunch of men standing in front of it. But in fact, there was a lot of women working on this. And this computer was originally designed to figure out the trajectory of artillery shells in World War II.
Oh.
When we figure out the trajectory, that means the path of your artillery. Those are the big bombs you shoot over onto the enemy.
That usually goes up and comes down again.
Like in a big arc, that's right. And generally, it took about 30 hours to figure this out by the human hand, but this computer could whittle it way down and do it super fast. However, World War II ended, and the machine was turned into different functions to do different things. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that there were pictures of women in these pictures, too, and there were never any names of these women. And so it was assumed that they were what we call
secretaries.
Well, they said they were refrigerator models because this was the thing. You always had like a beautiful woman standing in front of a refrigerator.
To try to sell more
That's right, to sell it. But as a matter of fact, these were programmers.
Yeah, there you go.
And they were erased from history. And it's so incredibly difficult to find the history of these women that worked on the very first modern computer. And what a shame.
In fact, a lot of innovation is driven by war, by military needs, and because the men are out fighting, women were allowed to work again. My mother, who was mostly a stay-at-home housewife, she worked during the war. So for those two things, developing innovative breakthrough technology and also for bringing women into the workforce, that is often due to war, which is an awful thing, but it does bring some good things with it sometimes. Over time, the technology shrank, and boy, did it ever shrink.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, from that, what I saw was literally one room that was filled with a computer, and then Chris was talking about whole floors that were filled with computers. First, computers became small enough to sit on a desk and be brought into the home. And that is really, really recent because that happened during the 80s.
There were ones prior to that. These were called microcomputers, and they filled basically your whole table. So instead of a whole room or a whole floor, it filled your whole table, and it was called a microcomputer, right. Which sounds funny to us today because micro is really, really small. But I mean, compared to a floor-sized computer, it truly is micro.
Actually, we did have computers in the 70s when I was in high school, the early 70s, but that was just something that a school would have. It was very expensive equipment, and people were predicting someday every home is going to have a computer, and that was a very shocking prediction at the time.
Do you remember when you got your first computer?
Oh, yeah.
In home? What, roughly, when was that?
It was in the 80s.
And my dad had a computer in the 80s, too.
Because I still brought a typewriter with me from the States because it had different fonts. I thought that was really cool. My brother-in-law says, we're switching to computers. Why did you get a typewriter? I love those extra fonts, which I hardly ever used. But soon after we moved to Taiwan and I started working for the government, That's when I was trained in how to use a computer for word processing.
I actually still learned how to word process on a typewriter. Even though my dad had a computer, I actually learned how to word process to type on a typewriter.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
That was still being taught
that way. It was still a thing
way.
all the way in the 90s.
But I think my computer training occurred in about 1985.
Okay.
1985. Okay, then they were made lightweight and portable, giving us the laptop. So from being this big desktop model, they made them smaller and thinner, and they became what we call notebook computers or laptops.
I'm sorry. Do you remember the red button you would have to push to navigate on your old laptop?
Oh, yeah. It would look like an eraser.
Yeah, it was like that little knob in the middle.
Yeah. And then they invented the mouse. That's right. So this development is all really recent. Today, most people have something even smaller, a smartphone that can fit into a pocket. And as I was saying earlier, it's a bit too small to use comfortably, but it's really handy to bring along in your hiking belt or your purse to check things when you need to check them.
It's a blessing and a curse. I have to say, It's been great for productivity, though. I'll tell you, in terms of getting work done, it's really nice having a cell phone.
It really is. Though that's as compact as most people are used to, computers and technology are getting even tinier. Well, I have to say we did have smaller devices like the iPod.
You know, it's funny that I feel a lot of companies, for a long time, they were chasing how small could we possibly get this cell phone. But in fact, there's quite a solid market for tablets and larger size cell phones. Just like Karen said, sometimes it's nice to have that real estate. And I don't know, I dislike companies that try to just make it as small as possible and take away features. Like, I want a device that has a lot of functions. Don't make it too small.
I don't like a device that makes my fingers feel fat.
Yeah. Like, just you can't type properly, right?
Exactly.
All right, let's move to our next paragraph. One of the tiniest forms of technology available today is the microbot. A microbot is a very tiny robot, a machine programmable by a computer that is built to perform specific tasks.
Now, you've got the devices separate. The microbot is very small, so you don't have to fiddle around on the microbot itself, I guess, and make your fingers feel really fat, like I was saying. You actually program it from a computer, and that's sort of how an Apple Watch works. So a lot of the things that you set on your Apple Watch, you actually control them from an iPhone.
So there was this famous ad from the 1980s from a company called Radio Shack that sold various electronics, and he's holding a video camera, and he has a calculator, and he has a typewriter, and all of these various technologies that you had to buy individually, and they were hundreds of dollars each. And someone pointed out that all of these things in this ad, thousands of dollars altogether, fit in your pocket on a cell phone.
They're now all in this little device.
That's right, in this tiny rectangle we keep in our pocket. However, a microbot is not that. A microbot is not trying to do many things that are very useful for you. They have often very specific tasks they want to perform. Let's continue. You might be inclined to refer to this as just a small robot, but the size and dimensions of microbots are actually quite precise.
So in our minds, we're imagining small, and it's getting very, very small. But it's not just infinitely small any old way. It has very, very specific size and dimensions. Like it says, dimensions means how long, how wide, and how deep.
A microbot is less than 1 millimeter in width, approximately the size of the tip of a pencil.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's crazy to think something like that can be built. Your fingers definitely can't do it.
And now they really feel fat.
Now, in width just means wide. Let's continue here. In comparison, a small robot, which can be up to 100 centimeters in width, would be absolutely gigantic.
Once you compare them on that scale.
Yeah, and of course, gigantic is the adjective form of a giant.
And that makes me think of bicycles.
If you think that microbots are as small as you can get, think again.
All right. When you use the sentence structure, you know that this is already really small and it's already blowing your mind, but you just wait. There's something that's really, really going to blow your mind coming up ahead.
We'll often follow this up with, you haven't seen nothing yet.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah, there we go. Nanobots, smaller than 1 micrometer exist, but these are so small that they aren't visible to the naked eye.
That is beyond mind-blowing because it's already one thing to imagine a computer that's about the size of a pencil point, But to imagine that it's so small you can't see it anymore, I mean, that's just kind of going crazy.
Yeah, so nano is it's a very useful word to learn now because we often talk about nanofibers. They're built into clothes. Technology is being woven into fabrics, and they're often using nanotechnology. Pay attention to this. You'll see it more and more as we go along. And Karen, we actually had a little interesting discussion about the word micrometer here before the show started.
Right, because I was thinking, are you sure that isn't micrometer? And then Chris gave the right answer.
So a micrometer actually is it's a machine, it's a device that measures the width or size of really small things, and the pronunciations are very similar. So we have a micrometer and a micrometer.
So the micrometer is the device, the micrometer is the unit of measure. And our last paragraph, since microbots are so small, they are potentially very cheap. Now, if you make it that small, it might be very, very difficult to manufacture because computer chips, they're very sensitive. And as we found out lately with the shortage of computer chips during COVID, which are 90% of them are produced here in Taiwan, we found out that it would take years to build up a new manufacturing facility to make microchips. So that's why Taiwan is so important in this area. Now, even if something is very small, it might be very difficult to make. However, but because it is so small, you need fewer raw materials to make it. So maybe that will make it cheaper.
Yeah, honestly, this surprised me a bit. I reasoned that if something was so small, you must need a lot of precise equipment.
Which I'm sure you really have to have.
Which is expensive, right?
Yeah.
And it needs to be accurate in order to create the device properly. I reasoned that these would be pretty expensive, but, it shows what I know.
But if you produce a huge quantity,
right,
then you can bring the cost down. Scientists and engineers working to develop these microbots believe that they could be useful to explore environments or areas that are too small or dangerous for people.
When I was thinking about this article, my mind instantly went to medicine. These will be used for less invasive surgeries, and they'll be in your bloodstream, that kind of thing.
Have you read Isaac Asimov's book, The Incredible Journey, I think it's called?
It's kind of going through the body, right?
It's right. It's a little capsule that actually can diagnose and treat illnesses by going through the body. And humans can actually fit inside this capsule.
Have we done this program yet on this topic? I feel like we've talked about.
We might have.
We might.
Yeah, we might have. But that was an amazing story. And it's getting closer to reality, except for I don't know how they're going to fit people in it.
Except for that part. But yeah, definitely maybe remotely controlled going through your body. Yeah, why not?
That's already being done. Yeah.
All right, let's continue to our next sentence.
And because the computing power of one single microbot isn't that large, microbots could be deployed in large groups or swarms of microbots. So just one of these actually can't maybe do that much. But if you have a whole swarm of them, we usually use the word swarm for bees.
That's right.
Because a whole bunch of bees fly together in a pattern around the hive or elsewhere. And that's when they're kind of dangerous if you have made them angry. Yeah, a swarm of bees coming after you. So a swarm is usually thought of as a group of bees.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
For you, I always hear different answers for this. How many bees make up a swarm? How many bees do you need before you have a swarm? 3 bees, 10 bees, 50 bees?
I think it's a visual image rather than a number. It's enough so that it looks sort of like a cloud.
It has to be cloud-shaped, right?
And it's buzzing.
Yeah, if you have 10 bees, it's a lot of bees, but it's not a swarm, right?
Unless they form a cloud.
Then they have a little...
a little swarm.
A little swarm. I just was reasoning this number in my head. How many is a bee, is a swarm?
Now, I think it's more of an image and also the effect it's having on the observer.
The buzzing is, you really feel that.
And you're getting kind of scared. Okay. So to deploy something means to use it for a specific purpose. This term is often used in military usage, to deploy troops. That means you're sending troops to an area to carry out military maneuvers. At the moment, the biggest obstacle in the development of these tiny machines is figuring out how to power a robot that can only contain a minuscule battery. And let me tell you, this is a big, big problem because I have a number of devices that died when the battery died. You can recharge and recharge and recharge it up to, say, 4 years, and then the battery can no longer be recharged. The manufacturer will not give you a new battery. They give you no way for replacing the battery. This has happened to me for 3 somewhat expensive devices, one of which is Apple.
This is called planned obsolescence. They want you to just keep buying new devices after a few years. I think Europe does a better job. They kind of force companies to allow you the right to repair your devices. I think it's kind of
that's right.
ridiculous.
Right to repair.
That's right. It's kind of ridiculous. We're not allowed to fix our own things. Please.
One of them was an electronic instrument. It was several $100s. And I said, it's flashing blue and red. And they said, oh, that means that the battery is dead. I said, well, how can I replace the battery? They said, well, you can't. I said, well, what can I do? They said, well, we suggest that you take it to a proper recycling center.
Yeah, buy a new one.
I was so shocked. I didn't even answer that letter. What more can you say? That's the way they've designed it. And recently, they started promoting the same instrument again. And I thought, you're not warning your buyers, your potential buyers, about what's going to happen in about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely criminal that we're not allowed to purchase batteries easily and replace them ourselves. As you mentioned, you have an Apple Watch. This is one of the reasons I dislike Apple. I think they create good devices, but I dislike that they take agency out of my hand, that I can't personalize my device. I can't expand the memory. I can't fix or tool around with the thing that I paid money for. Like, no, if you attempt to change this in any way, you void your warranty. I think that's insane. But that's the market we're living in. I suspect it will change in the future. But as it stands, we're kind of stuck with, if you want an Apple product, this is what you get, and that's it.
They made it very, very difficult to save MP3 files because they didn't want people copying music. And I have a lot of my own MP3 files. Anyway, that's history, but that is another matter. So this issue of being very small, it's going to be hard to give them a battery that will last very long. This is a huge issue.
So while we're talking about computers, I think it's time to discuss the very first virus that spread widely across the internet. Now, the internet has not been around for a terribly long time. In the 1980s, it kind of hits the masses, I suppose, for most governments and universities. And the name of this very first virus was called the Morris, and it spread to almost every computer on the internet back in 1988, which, wasn't that big. The point was to discover how many various computers were connected. They wanted to find out what was the true size of the internet back at this time. And so there's this Cornell grad student that set up this little program. They would just count. It was basically a counter. However, he made a programming mistake, and it worked a little too well, and it infected 15,000 computers in just 15 hours. And it
What was the effect on the computers?
They weren't working well.
Oh,
and
no.
they needed to kind of basically be reprogrammed. And this guy got himself in some trouble, but I suppose it's with great power comes great responsibility. That's the famous line from Spider-Man. And unfortunately, unfortunately, our grad student was not quite in control of his great power.
Okay, that's all we have time for today. We're going to tell the rest of the story tomorrow. Tune in then. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.